Welcome to the Life You Love podcast.
We're your hosts, Grace Lemire
and Erin Convertini.
This podcast is for the dreamers and the doers.
For the women who want to create a life they genuinely love waking up to.
We believe that life's short, so let's build one we love.
I am so excited for today's episode. We are bringing on Raimee Iacofano to talk all things traveling on a budget, fitting travel into a 9-to-5 schedule, and also solo travel. Raimee is such a seasoned traveler. I swear she's somewhere international once a month or more, and she's been traveling for over 10 years, so she has so much experience, and this episode has so much useful information if you want to start traveling, but you think it isn't attainable.
This episode made me want to go book a trip, literally, swiftly, like immediately.
Yeah.
Literally, we just wrapped up our conversation with her, and Erin and I were like, okay, so we're gonna go to like Bali or something. I don't know. I don't know. I love traveling, but I definitely don't. I mean, I do it a lot, but like I feel like I could do it a lot more. And I feel like Raimee just gave so many like practical tips, and also just hearing about her trips and solo travel, it just made me want to literally go book like a million trips right now.
Yeah. We've had Raimee as like a guest idea on our list literally since we started the podcast. We knew she would be such a good person to talk about this, and she did such a good job of making travel feel so attainable regardless of whether you work remotely and you maybe want to go work remote at a different destination, or whether you have an in-person 9-to-5 job and a lot of people just think like, okay, it's never going to work with my work schedule. She's kind of in the same boat and she makes it work. She gives a ton of tangible tips, everything from how to fit it into your schedule, how to take PTO, and then on the flip side of that, how to actually fit it into your budget. She has a ton of great tips there as well. So yeah, I'm the same way. Literally, as soon as we wrapped up the conversation, Grace and I are like, okay, so we're probably going to go spend a month in Bali. It's time to stop twiddling our thumbs and make that happen, because the more we just keep saying we want to travel, but we're not actually taking action on it, yeah, that's not doing anything for us. So This episode was so good. It was so jam-packed with a ton of good information. So let's get right into it and bring in Raimee. We are so excited to announce that the Life You Love community is going international. In February of 2025, we are hosting an international group trip and retreat to Colombia with EF Ultimate Break. If you've never traveled with EF Ultimate Break before or have never taken a group trip before, think 1 week surrounded by 20 to 40 like-minded women that can truly become your best friends. I've taken countless group trips in my life, and it's the perfect way to travel more even if you don't have anyone to travel with, or if planning the trips and figuring out the logistics of the trip stresses you out. In Colombia, we're having a week of sightseeing, beaches, boats, and of course, building a community of like-minded women, which we could not be more excited about. If you want to see the full trip itinerary, learn more, or book the trip, we'll put the link in the show notes. Now let's get back to the episode. Raimee, welcome to the Life You Love podcast. We are so excited to have you on today. I feel like this episode is such a long time coming. You were on our like guest ideas list, I swear, since we started this podcast, and it's been about a year now, and we are just now getting around to bringing you on. So we're so excited for today's episode. And we feel like so many people have so many questions around these topics that we're going to talk about today. So we can't wait to get into them. But we already did a little bit of an intro around what this episode is going to be about. But can you introduce yourself, give us a little background on who you are and what you do?
Yes, thank you for having me. I remember when you told me about this podcast idea over a year ago. So this is so cool. I'm Raimee, also known as Raimee Travel on all the socials. I'm from Michigan, recently moved to LA, I guess 4 years ago now, and started doing travel content creation in conjunction with my full-time job after falling in love with travel years and years ago, and finally turned it into a sustainable side hustle / potentially its own business. But I do also work a 9-to-5. So I love talking about how travel and work can work together. And that's kind of what my mission is with my platforms, to show that you can do both, and also just tell people about how amazing travel is and help them do it better, smarter, and for less money. So I think it fits into like the whole life you live aspect, because I would not love life as much as I do without that. So that's me.
When did you start traveling? Like I know now you travel so much just from following you on Instagram. I'm always seeing all the different trips you're going on, but like when did you actually start traveling?
Yes. So my first ever international trip, I was 14 years old. My mom took us on a cruise to Belize and Honduras, which is super random. I didn't even know what those countries were at 14. Like when would I know what that country was? But I remember the moment getting off the boat and looking around and thinking, whoa, there's a whole world. Sounds stupid now, but back then, I mean, this was probably 2008 or something, was my first trip. And that was the moment that changed everything for me. And I literally remember deciding, okay, how am I going to do this all the time. I need to figure that out. And then did study abroad in college, did a couple work exchanges where I was like living and working in London. I was trying to hustle my way to travel no matter what. I did a lot of crazy things to make it happen.
That is, yeah, so awesome. I feel like a lot of people take trips when they're a little bit younger, maybe either like in high school with their family or in college they study abroad. I know that was my situation, but
Yes.
then I just thought that like once I got a full-time job, it would have to stop. I remember literally crying in the taxi on the way home from studying abroad and being like, I'm never going to do that again. So I like that you kind of
Right?
like took the attitude to keep doing it in your adult life. What was the first kind of like big international trip that you took in conjunction with a 9 to 5 or whatever your full-time job was out of college?
Ooh, yeah. So out of college, I did the thing where I got a desk job. I worked in marketing, and I also had that moment similarly, like after, the freedom of college and studying abroad, being like, wow, I guess I'm not going to be able to do that. And sitting at my desk job day in and day out, I didn't mind the job. I didn't mind the people, but I always still had that desire to travel. And honestly, the first international trip I took, I remember I was so scared to ask for the time off. I was 22, 23, like at my first job. I had found round trip tickets to Iceland actually for $200 from Detroit to Iceland.
Oh my
This
gosh.
was in 2016. And I just booked it on a whim because I had never seen a cheap flight price like that before. And I was like, okay, I booked it. And now I'm going to ask for permission. And I know people will not like agree with that approach. They might think that you should request the time off first. But I don't really agree with that. I think if you find a cheap deal, like book it. There are ways to cancel the flight if you really can't get the time off. But I did end up, asking for a week off at my first job. That was kind of my first, soiree into making international travel a priority. I had 10 vacation days to use, and I only used 5 of them for the trip because I tacked it on to 2 weekends, which is one of the tactics I always tell people to do. Like, tack on your trip to 2 weekends. You can make it longer so you can go international. And then I also went during a federal holiday. I went during, I think it was President's Day, and I tacked it onto that. So that was an additional day that I got too. So that's one of the main tips I give to people working like a corporate 9 to 5. Every job is different. Nurses and teachers all have their different schedule, but really, really, it's about optimizing your schedule and asking far enough in advance too. I did ask like 2 months out because that's when I found the flight from. So I think that softened the random spontaneous blow that I was about to give them because it was like, oh, it's 2 months from now.
How often do you travel now? Like, how often are you actually going on trips?
So this year in particular has been a little bit crazy. I will say people think I travel more than I probably do because right now my full-time job is hybrid. So I'm not fully remote. I do have to go in, meet with the team, usually once a week or every other week. But I think now I'm probably traveling at least twice a month, not always internationally, but somewhere domestically at least twice a month. Usually it's a long weekend, or I will be traveling and then taking a week to work remotely. So I'm not using all PTO for all of the trips I'm going on. And I can talk more about that because balancing that is crazy, and asking to be able to do that is a whole process, but we can get into that too.
Yeah, I feel like there's a couple different types of like traveling with a full-time job. It's like if you work remote, then trying to navigate the whole like, okay, how do I ask my boss? Is that allowed with the type of job I have? Because some types of jobs, like you can't take your laptop out of the country, or once you get to the
Yeah.
country, how are you going to manage your schedule, working like crazy hours, and then still having time to have fun on the trip? But then on the flip side of that, if you are in person, then it's actually asking for the time off, maybe asking for like a little bit of an extended leave of absence if you want to take a longer trip. Have you ever done something like that where you've asked for like a significant amount of time off?
Yes, actually, that same first marketing job, I ended up working there, that desk job for 2 years. This was before remote work was even a thought in people's mind, right? So I remember asking them if I could go to Paris for 3 weeks and I would be working for one of the weeks. And they didn't really love that idea, but I did ask, and I said, like, I'm gonna prove it to you. This is one thing I will say, and my advice for this. If travel is a priority for you and it's something that interests you and it's important to you, make that known in the workplace. Your coworkers, they do end up becoming your friends. Hope. I know there's different toxic work environments, but when you make your passions and like your outside interests known, I think people want to support that, and they know that you're not going to be good at your job if you're not also enjoying your life. So I've always made it a point to maybe be like a little bit annoying, obsessive with how much I like travel. But that way, when I do ask for these things, like people just know I'm going to be a better employee if I get to do these things. And also just being a good employee, being trustworthy, being reliable, delivering your work at a, on time and at a good level, like gives you a lot of leverage if you are a good employee and they like you and they trust your work. I mean, that's a dumb and simple answer, but it's the truth. I think I've established a lot of trust with my bosses throughout the years where, when I ask for crazy things sometimes, they let it happen.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. I remember at my last corporate job before I quit that job, I was there for like 3 years. And I remember in my like HR onboarding session, they were saying that in order to qualify for like full-time benefits, so still being able to have health insurance through the company and everything, you had to work there 10 months out of the year. So there was like some stipulation where it would be an unpaid like month leave or whatever. But if you really wanted to take a month off, like you still could qualify for full-time benefits. Obviously, your manager would have to approve it. But like you said, like
Hmm.
making that known, kind of like talking about it all the time and making it known that that is a high priority in your life so that if a year in advance you're asking for a month off, like you can plan accordingly for that. And hopefully your team can kind of get behind it.
Yeah, exactly. And kind of, too, when you get a job offer and they offer a certain amount of vacation days, or they say, oh, vacation is unlimited, clarify what that means. You can negotiate that too. Like if they're not meeting your salary requirements, maybe you can say, hey, well, instead of 10 days, could I get 15 days? Like there's things you can do in the good negotiation process that I think people don't think about. And I negotiated actually recently when I came up on my 2 year at this current job that I'm at. I started this job with 10 vacation days, and it was just kind of not talked about whether that was going to be increasing every year. So the second year, I made a point to say, hey, like I've been here for a while now. What is the actual vacation policy? Can we move the 10 days to 15? And like have some kind of system for that, because I'm at a startup, so it's a little bit more flex, but just, asking for that time, especially after a year, your yearly review, like how can you increase those days?
I feel like there are a couple like buckets here where kind of like what Erin was saying earlier, where let's say you do have an in-person job where the only real option to, if you want to go travel, is to take that PTO. So like starting there, like, do you have any tips for maximizing your PTO? I know you said like align it with weekends and stuff. Do you have any other tips for like really making the most out of the PTO that you do have?
Yeah, so I loved telling people and looking this up, especially as we're ending 2024. For 2025, if you can plan, where do you want to go in 2025? When do you think you might want to go? Then type in Google how to maximize PTO in 2025. It will give you a list of all the possible like federal holidays, and it'll tell you exactly what dates to do. So for example, like President's Day, it'll tell you like February 2nd to February 14th, turn 3 vacation days into 10 because of the weekends, because of that holiday. Overall, you can turn 10 days into, I think, around 44 to 50 days. And you do have to be like meticulous about planning this, but I think that's like the biggest advice. If you do want to take longer trips, if you want to go international and you want to have, more than just a weekend trip, that is something that I do every single year. There's not a federal holiday on the calendar where I don't have a trip planned, because it's an extra day for me.
I
I
love
love that
that.
so much. And then kind of flipping the switch there for people that work remote and they still maybe think that, like, okay, I see other people taking their laptop and working remote, but like that's not realistic for me. It sounds like too much of a headache. What are some maybe like places that you have gone that you've done where you're still working remote? Or do you have any like of your favorite destinations that are very remote work friendly? What are some of your best tips for that?
Yes. Okay. So time zones are always an issue with this, right? Like it's a lot harder to go from Los Angeles, where I live, to Europe and work hours. I would be starting at 5 or 6 p.m. in Europe. So some of my favorite destinations to start with, I love Mexico City so much. And it's in, I think it's Central Time Zone. I don't know, but it aligns with the US. So if you do have to be online during US hours, Mexico City is great. Such a cool city, amazing food, tons of cafes to work from too, which is very important. It's very remote worker, digital nomad friendly. Same with Colombia. So basically, anywhere that's in line with the US, I would recommend doing if you're worried about the time zone thing. Now, for me, I'm a little bit of a psychopath, and recently I was working remotely from Ireland, which I did start work at 6 p.m. and I worked until like 10 p.m. or midnight some nights. But then I had the whole day free to explore. So if you're willing to push yourself a little bit, like it kind of is fun because then you can enjoy the destination during the day when you want to be enjoying it. And then, go home and work from your laptop, depending on all the projects you have going on. But I do that sometimes too.
Yeah, my manager just spent like three weeks, I think, in either Australia or New Zealand. And I'm not exactly sure what the time zone difference is there from Central
That one's
Time to like over
crazy.
there. But she was
Yeah.
literally working in the middle of the night.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
But it's like kind of one of those things. It's like you can work during the day, but then you might be giving up some time to like go explore or something, or you can make your work schedule a little weird, but still have time
Yeah.
to like do things during the day. I love that.
Yeah,
Dang, I
exactly.
I know last year I did like we called it a workcation, where we went to California for 6 weeks and we were working full time the whole time. So we were working probably like 6 to 8 hours a day. Both of us worked like for ourselves. So we had that flexibility. But I think that
Cool.
was interesting too, because we were there for such a long time that like we had time to explore anyways, because we had the weekends and things like that. And
Yes.
honestly, renting an Airbnb for an entire month like that was
Cheaper.
it was literally cheaper than if I was paying rent at home. Both of my friend and I lived at our parents' house at the time, but it was not that bad because we were splitting it. I think we paid like maybe 1,600 or 1,800 each for this
Oh
like
yeah.
little 2 bedroom house, which like that's cheaper than my
That's like
rent.
normal.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
That's like
that's
normal.
cheaper.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it was kind of nice to be away and work during that. But I'm curious what that would look like for someone who maybe does work corporate and like, yeah, can you just like pick up and take your laptop elsewhere, or like how does that work? How does that work for you? Like if you're like, "Oh, I want to go work remotely here," do you have to tell them you're going to work remotely there, or is it just like I'm doing my hours?
Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't, which is the funny thing. But like I said, it all comes down to trust and like how much value you bring the company. For Ireland, the reason I was there was for a brand campaign with the tourism board, and I literally
Mm.
got the deal 2 days before I was supposed to take off
Oh
for
my
it.
gosh.
But it was such a crazy opportunity. Like I was like, okay, I'm doing it. I'm just going to tell them and they're going to have to deal with it kind of thing.
Hmm.
Not everyone has that situation. Totally get that. But I do think I have some friends who work very corporate jobs. One of my friends works at GoFundMe. I have another friend who works at TripAdvisor. Both of them have done things where they've asked work like, hey, I really want to work from Europe for a month. And they figure it out. They make the schedule work. Both of those companies are just great. They treat their employees well and they will help you do those personal goals. And I remember them telling me about how they had asked for it and everything. And also another thing I could say is if you are interested in doing this, look at jobs at travel companies because one, they're pretty understanding when it comes to travel stuff. Like my friend who works at TripAdvisor, I swear, she's like in New Zealand right now actually and don't know how she does her work, but she's always somewhere else because they get it. And I think working for a travel company, when I worked for a travel company, that is actually when I was able to travel the most. So I
Yeah,
always recommend people looking into that if they're
I love that.
interested.
And then where do you typically stay when you're traveling internationally and still trying to fit some work in? Because I know like there are not co-working spaces, but like co-living spaces or hostels, or like what is the typical arrangement
Yeah.
there?
So if you want to be in a place where you're meeting other digital nomads or remote workers, which I think is super fun, but you don't want to stay at like the hostel situation because that's maybe a little bit more rowdy. Like there are things like you just said, like a co-living situation. There's a company called Outsite that I really like. They have awesome, what's it called? Not venues. They have
Accommodations?
accommodations, yeah, accommodations all over the world where it's actually built for remote workers. So they have great Wi-Fi, they have outlets everywhere, and everyone there is there to work and live, and it makes it a lot better of an environment than maybe like a typical hostel. I also am a huge fan of getting an Airbnb because one, you're getting more local experience, two, there's Wi-Fi usually, and you kind of, get to live that little dual life for a second and pretend that you're working from your apartment in Paris for a week.
I love that so much. I feel like that's a really good segue into the sort of like solo travel segment, because I know we want to talk about like solo travel and then
Yes.
also get some of your tips for traveling on a budget. I feel like you do a lot of solo travel, and obviously you are like a female in your 20s. So yeah, what does that look like? When have you taken like your first solo trip? What are some of your favorite destinations for solo travel? And is it safe? Because I feel like that's a lot of the questions that people have.
Yeah, so I took my first solo trip when I was 17. Again, I don't know why, what I was crazy. I just wanted to get out. I just wanted to get out of Michigan, I think. So I was pretty desperate to do that anyway. I went on my first solo trip to Ireland, and I call it a solo trip, but it actually was a part of a group trip. I went by myself, but I think I would tell anyone who wants to dip their toes into solo travel, but still is a little bit unsure, join a group trip. It's such a good way to like still push yourself out of your comfort zone. You don't know these people going into it, but you do have a little bit of built-in comfort there. So that's what I did when I was 17. And that honestly gave me the confidence to be like, okay, now I think I could do this totally on my own. And I did my first ever solo, like backpacking Europe trip when I was 22. And best decision of my life. I did 3 months. I traveled by train all over Europe with literally a backpack. I could never do this now, but I'm approaching, I actually turned 30 in like 8 days.
Oh my gosh. Happy early birthday.
Crazy. But I was gonna say, if you are in your like early to mid 20s, do a solo trip with a backpack, stay in hostels. Like you probably won't ever want to do it again, honestly, but it is such a magical experience. So and was it safe? I always felt safe staying in these hostels where there's so many other solo travelers. Didn't feel lonely because of that either. In fact, I actually kind of got annoyed of people sometimes. Like there were so many people around all the time. So you'll be surprised, how not solo you end up feeling if you do it that way. That said, you could still feel lonely for other reasons, but it's such a self-growth moment, and it's nothing else has built my confidence in that way, or my like understanding of myself and how capable I am. So it's magical.
I love that. I feel like there's a lot of people who genuinely want to travel more, especially when it comes down to PTO. I know this has kind of been a thing in my friend group is like, because I work fully for myself, I don't have to take PTO, but then my friends do have PTO, but then the way that they accrue PTO is slightly different. So some of my friends will be like, oh, I'm accruing PTO throughout the year, so I have to wait until I have enough PTO to be able to request that PTO. And other friends work at companies where they're like, oh yeah, like I'm -3 days into my PTO, but I know by the end of the year I'm going to accrue all that back, so my company will still let me request that time off like in advance. And that can make it tricky when you're like, I really want to go on a trip, but my friends don't have the PTO to do it. Or, I really want to make it a priority. And so I'm going to request that PTO off months in advance, but maybe my friends are kind of like, like dragging their feet. And I feel like it's one of those things in your 20s where it's like, sometimes you do just have to like go alone and just like do it alone. I wanted to ask you, like, I know I did a solo trip in the US. I went to Atlanta. I was supposed to be there for a month and I left after a week because it was just, I wasn't having a good time.
It was not in your astrocartography. That was not the city for you.
Nope, it was not.
Really?
It literally said it was going to be like actually one of the worst places, and it was, which is,
I find that is so true for me. It's interesting.
it was crazy. But a lot of people, when I talked about wanting to travel full time, because that was kind of what I was going to do for a while by myself, a lot of people said to start domestically. They were like, start in the US, like where you can just catch a quick flight home and then go international. But at the same time, like I live in Massachusetts, so flying to somewhere like Portugal, it's really not that
Actually
far.
quicker than the West Coast even.
Right, it is, yeah. So I'm like curious if you have thoughts on that or like opinions on whether if you're going to do solo travel, whether you should start in the US or outside the US.
Ooh, okay. Well, I'll say something a little controversial, but I always feel safer abroad than in the US, to be honest. And I hear that a lot from travelers, right? For a multitude of reasons, but I'm all for it. Whatever you're comfortable with, if going to Chicago for the weekend and like testing the waters feels right, then by all means. But I'm also a huge proponent of just like doing it because you're going to be scared either way. you will be scared either way. So you might as well go to Lisbon, and if you have a desire to go there, right?
Mhm.
And also sometimes those international flights can be cheaper or the same price as domestic. So if you have a limited budget and limited time, I would advocate for pushing yourself to go somewhere completely new and like really, really do it. But
I
that might be
totally
just
agree
me.
with that. So when I studied abroad in college, I went totally solo. I was 19 and it was my first time ever getting on a plane by myself, and I went all the way to Italy, and I like there was no one at my university there. Like did not know anyone, got on that plane totally by myself. And yeah, I was
Amazing.
scared, but like once you get there you kind of just figure it out. But I also do understand why people would have a ton of hesitations, like getting on a flight going to a country where they don't speak the language. They have no idea what they're going to do when they get off of that plane and get into the airport. So I really do
Yeah.
like that you said your first solo trip was a group trip, because a lot of times, like even though you're flying solo, once you land in the airport, typically they have transportation arranged or they have like directions on how to get to the place that you're staying. And then once you're there, everything is organized for you. So you really, at least like that first time, you really don't
Yeah.
have to do a lot of that planning, and a lot of like you don't have as much to be scared of. And I know you actually recently hosted your own group trip, which Grace and I are doing in early 2025, which we're so excited
Yay.
about. Can you talk about your experience with that and like how it went down? And obviously we're trying to encourage girls to want to come on our trip, so we would love to hear your experience.
Yes. Okay. You guys know I'm a little bit of an introvert, so I was a little bit hesitant to do this. But again, I wanted to push myself and see how it would all go. And I had the best time. I had the best group. It was such a diverse group of people. Actually, one of the people who came on the trip, it was his very first time overseas, and he was 42 years old. And I was just like, I literally was tearing up when he got there and fell in love with the country immediately.
Aw.
But I was like, this has changed his life. He's addicted to travel now, and I'm just like so happy.
Oh,
I really like it, like you said, a group trip can really open the doors if you are feeling a little bit nervous. Like this guy was texting me before flying over to Iceland, just saying like, this is going to be my longest flight I've ever done. Like, blah blah blah. What are your tips? And it was so rewarding, and we really just had the best time. Like you said, everything was organized. I got to be a traveler too and just hang out with everyone, and yeah, it was the best time ever. Where are you guys going for yours?
we're going to Colombia in February of 2025, which we're so
Oh,
excited
heck yeah.
about. Yeah, we feel like it's going to be such a good itinerary of like beaches, boats, exploring. Yeah, we're
Colombia
so
is
excited.
amazing. Colombia is so cool, so affordable, and amazing food. Where is it? Like Cartagena, Medellin?
Yes,
Those two,
yeah,
yeah.
both of those places. The full
Perfect. Okay.
itinerary will be in the show notes of this episode if anyone wants to check it out.
Guys, okay, and also this is perfect because if anyone coming on your trip is interested in like travel or remote work or anything, Medellin is one of the best places to work remotely, and it's in, the US time zone. So someone there will fall in love with it and they'll decide to move there. I
Yeah,
already
I
know.
actually have a friend that's a full-time real estate investor, and he's a content creator too, but he lives in Colombia half the year and then
Cool.
lives in the US half the year because like you said, it's so affordable. It's such a cool place to live. So it's been like high on my bucket list for a really long time. And we felt like it would be such a good way to like allow people that international travel experience without
Yeah.
going completely across the world, because we do understand people are
Yeah.
probably flying by themselves. Maybe you've never taken a flight by yourself before, and like that can be very intimidating. So this is only like, I think it's a
Totally.
6-hour flight or something. So I thought it would be pretty low key, but we were so excited about it.
That's so fun. When I went there in 2017 and I loved it. I want to go back. Maybe I'll come on the group trip.
You
See
should,
you
you
guys
should.
there.
That would be
I'm literally so excited. You talking about the person on your trip, like that being their first international flight. I'm like such a softie, but I was like literally getting chills and like low key feeling like
I
tearing up
know.
because I'm like, it's one of those things where I feel like once you take the initial leap and you're like, you know what, like I'm gonna actually freaking do this. And we talk a lot on this podcast about like if you have a desire to do something, like okay, what's the action that you're going to take? Because at some point, you can't just sit there like twiddling your thumbs, being like, I want to travel more. I want to travel more. Like at some point, you have to like
Exactly.
go on the group trip, book the flights, like actually do it. And I feel like when I traveled solo, my saving grace and the thing that like kept me from not literally flying home even sooner from Atlanta was the fact that I found a Facebook group of women in Atlanta, and I ended up posting being like, y'all, I'm having the worst time here. Somebody please just come hang out with me. And there were so many girls who I ended up hanging out with.
Uh,
And that was my saving grace. But like, it's so having that like built-in community, because you're not going to find that
Yes.
necessarily everywhere. I just truly lucked out. Like, I could have posted in that Facebook group and girls could have been just like crickets, like
Yeah.
not saying anything,
Yeah.
because you just never know. But going on a group trip, I feel like, is the perfect way to like, yeah, do it, like show up solo, but then you're also showing up solo when there's a bunch of other people showing up solo. And the whole purpose of a
Yes.
group trip is to meet people and like make friends and
Yes.
be on the trip together. So you know that everyone there
Exactly.
is in the same mindset. I kind of view it like going to college, where when you go to college, you're like, holy crap, like this is so scary. And there's like 20,000 people here, and like, but then you realize like, wait, but like everyone's here for like the same reason, and like everyone wants to make friends and have fun.
And they're going to be from your community, and you guys have a like-minded community, and same with mine. So I mentioned to you guys before we started recording, the youngest person on my trip was 20 years old and the oldest was 67. And I was a little bit worried about that, because I was like, what the heck is this going to be like? But everyone had that common like theme, because they were a part of my community. We all got along so well. We all still have a WhatsApp chat group that we literally, I mean, it's been like a month since the trip now, and we're all still texting in it every single day.
It's so
It's
cute.
so cute. I love it so much. So
That is so fun. I love that so much. Grace, you mentioned like the whole idea of you can't just sit here and say like, I want to travel, I want to travel. At some point, you just have to do it. But I also feel like another big blocker for why people don't travel is obviously money. And they think that it's just not attainable. And you see people having their like European summer and you're like, how the heck is anybody affording this? So do you have any tips? I know you do, because you post about it all the time. And we'll link all of your socials in the show notes of this episode. Everyone needs to go follow Raimee, because she posts the best travel content. But what are some of your best tips for traveling on a budget? Do you have any tools that you really like, or what does that look like?
Yes. So first, I wanted to comment on like the how is everyone in Europe right now thing, because I just want to say, like, I've met so many people throughout the years, and I've wondered the same thing. Even me, who travels a lot, I still look at these people's trips and I'm like, how are they affording that? And to be honest, a lot of times it's family money. So if you are comparing yourself to those people, just stop, because they have family money most of the time. Now, if you don't, like me, my favorite tips for traveling on a budget, number one is actually I would avoid European summer. One, it's way too expensive. You're going to find way better deals in the fall and spring, and there's going to be way less crowds, and it's not going to be 100 degrees. So, number one is really picking off-season dates to travel. Honestly, it will save you thousands, not only on like accommodation, which is significantly less expensive, but on airfare, everything's going to be cheaper, and it's so much better. Like I recently went to Paris in February, and people might think, oh, isn't it cold? Honestly, it's not that cold, and it's so much better when it's not crowded. So that's number one. Number two, favorite tools. One, Aaron's budget tracker for sure. And you know, the guy that came on my trip, who it was his first international trip, he actually mentioned he found my account through personal finance blogger, and he had been using a tracking template to track all of his finances to save up for this trip. Like, he was literally saving $1 at a time to make it happen. And that sounds insignificant, but like you said, if you have a goal, you will find ways to save the $5 here and there, and it is going to add up over time. Something that I do and I talk about a lot is, from every paycheck, I automatically deposit certain amounts into my travel sinking fund account. So without even thinking about it, every month, $100 is going in there. Sometimes it's less if I can't afford that much that month, right? But over time, now I'm looking at my travel sinking fund account that I've been building over the years, and there's a good chunk of change in there. So like, once you start, it feels so far away that you won't be able to do the trip. But look back in 6 months, a year, that account's going to be, maybe there's $5,000 in it, maybe there's $2,000 in it. That's enough to make a trip happen. So those are like my two biggest things, and there's so many other little ones.
No, I love that so much. I was just having this conversation with my girlfriends. We were on a girls' trip last weekend, and the girls were like, we need to do a European summer next year, like, you know, the trip that probably won't make it out of the group chat. But anyway, we were talking about like how expensive it was, and I was like, well, guys, like every time I go out on the weekend, I spend like $150. I was like, if I just skip that like 6 times, then all of a sudden there's my spending money for the trip. So it really is like all about prioritizing what you value and what you don't.
Yeah, I always talk about too, I don't get my nails done. Do they look ratchet? Yes. But does that save me $150 a month, also yes. Like I also don't have a car in LA, which is crazy, but I share cars, or I just calculate that like Uber is less than me owning a car, honestly. So like it is about prioritizing, and some people might think that that's crazy and that's not for them, but for me, I'm like that's money going towards my travel stuff.
Yeah.
So,
You
yeah.
Do you use credit card points? I feel like that's like a big thing people are going to be curious about. And
Yeah.
when you talked about like earlier, you said like the flights, international flights can sometimes be cheaper. That's something I've noticed because I notice in my credit card portals, a lot of times the deals, like sometimes I'll have a deal where it's like, oh, the points are worth like 25% more when you transfer it to this transfer partner. They're always the international airlines, like an Air France or something like that. It's
Hmm.
never like a JetBlue or a like a Delta that is having those deals. And I travel mostly domestically. I've only been out of the country twice. So I'm like, I don't know, I feel like you can get a lot of value there. Is that something that you kind of like dip your toes in or
Oh yes. Travel points and miles stuff is also a big reason why I'm able to travel so much. And I think I have 5 travel cards right now. And I know that sounds crazy, but when you are responsible with your finances and you're tracking everything and planning out how you're gonna like do the spending on each card and not getting them all at once, you can really optimize. I have like 400,000 points in my portals right now to use, and like I can't wait to use the points and figure out how I'm gonna use them next year. But I have saved thousands and thousands of dollars on travel by figuring out how to do this. I will say, and I always say this, like if you can't pay off the bill every month, don't do it. If you're going to get in a spending like spree, do not get a travel rewards card. But if you are spending a couple $1,000s a month just on groceries, on your car, your rent, there's a card that lets you pay rent and earn points for it, the Build card, which is a great card to have. That is money you're spending anyways. Why not get points for it that you can then use for travel? In my mind, that's free. That's girl math, but it is, you're already spending the money.
Yeah, no, definitely. We have an entire credit card points episode on the podcast that we'll link in the show notes of this episode as well,
Perfect.
because we talk all about it. But outside of credit card points, what are some of your best tips for finding flight deals? Because you talk about this on your socials all the time, and flights can be so crazy expensive, but also they don't have to be if you're strategic about
Yeah.
them. So what are your best tips there?
Okay, number one, pull up Google Flights, click on the little thing, put in your home airport, click on everywhere in the destination area, and then click on the map. The map view will show you all of the little flight prices around the world, and I have chosen where to go based on a flight price. Actually, that's why I ended up in Colombia. I didn't really think about going there. I found a deal for $300 round trip, literally by looking at the Google Flights map, and I was like, Detroit to Colombia for $300? I should just go there instead of picking Paris for $800 or $1,000, right? So I think really having an open mind about where and when you're going is super helpful. Now, when you can't be flexible on those things, there's other tips I would give about like when to book flights. There's a general rule for domestic flights. You want to be like 1 to 3 months out. For international, you want to be like 6 to 10 months out when booking. And then also, I love subscribing to Thrifty Traveler. It's a newsletter that will send you daily flight alerts. So I just got one the other day for like $800 round trip to Japan for next year. And I'm like, that sounds good. So like it kind of helps you decide when and where to go when you just like have exposure to all these deals, because you really, really can always find a cheap flight. It just might not be to where you thought you wanted to go.
I was subscribed to Thrifty Traveler for the longest time. It's so cool. You literally get deals for both point deals and cash
Yes.
deals like almost every single day, which is, I mean, it's paid. I think I was paying like $60 a year for the subscription,
Hmm.
but still I like loved getting all of the deals and stuff.
Yeah. There's a free version too if you don't want to commit yet, but you want to like kind of see what's going on. There's a free version you can test out. You don't get sent as many deals, but you'll get some good ones.
Are there any costs? Like, I feel like flight and hotel are things people like think about, right? And you can like set money aside for that and you can use points for those things. Are there any like costs to traveling that are kind of like, I don't want to call them like hidden costs, but things that like people don't really think about that you should really factor in? I know like travel insurance is one that people are always like, should I buy it? Should I not? But like, how do you budget? Like, when you're thinking about going on a trip, again, because like flight and hotel are like pretty obvious, or flight and accommodation, how are you thinking about budgeting for the entire trip, and like how are you estimating costs, and what are those costs you're thinking through?
Good question. I love that. And for travel insurance, yes, you should get it if you don't have a travel rewards credit card, because a lot of the times your card will cover the same thing as travel insurance. And if you want cheap travel insurance, check out Safety Wing. Not sponsored, but I love them and it's really cheap. And then for other costs, so like hidden costs, shit happens when you travel. There's always something that pops up, like, I don't know, your suitcase breaks, or you have to get, I don't know, like, oh, one time I brought the worst shoes possible on a trip. It gave me the worst blisters. And so I had to go out and buy another pair of shoes. So I like to think about, having a kind of an emergency fund for each trip, really, where it's like, okay, I'm going to have like 100, $200. That's like my emergency tap into portion of my budget, because I know something's going to happen where I'm going to need to like buy something that I didn't think I was going to. And then of course there's food. So food is also, I think it's like the third largest cost, especially if you're eating out for every meal. So some things I like to do to offset that cost is staying in an Airbnb where there's a kitchen. I know that's not as fun or glamorous, but if you can like save on 1 to 2 meals a day just by like making yourself breakfast or making yourself the coffee, that does save a lot of money. Second, if you are eating out, the best way to save money, of course, is to like try the street food, try the local food. If you're somewhere that's pretty touristy, my rule of thumb is walk 5 to 10 blocks away from that touristy area. The food is going to be cheaper, it's going to be less touristy, and it's going to be tasting better too. So these are all like little things that I do to save money on food, but really those are kind of the buckets. It's like emergency fund, food, accommodation, flight. And if I want to shop, I plan in advance for that. But I don't really shop that much abroad. Like it's just not a priority for me. But if you are in Europe and you're shopping, one time I did buy a designer bag and you get the tax back. So if you're planning to buy a designer bag, it's actually cheaper to go to Europe and do it because you'll get a tax credit back, and that can be helpful.
Yeah, I love that so much. We are just about out of time, but before we wrap up, because hopefully this episode is inspiring everyone to like travel more and stop just saying like, I want to travel, and actually do it. So with that, what are some of your favorite destinations? Like if someone maybe has never taken an international trip and they're planning it either solo or with their friend or partner or whatever, what are some of your favorite places?
Okay, so for your first trip, if it's your first international trip, I would highly recommend going to Spain. It's a little bit of like an easier destination, I would say, and it's also really affordable. You can get a margarita in Spain for €4, which is literally like $5. And it always blows my mind. Beer is like $2 and food is really cheap. It's such a fun destination that I think it would really like get your travel passion started there. And there's also a ton of solo travelers that go there too, so it's a place where you'd be able to meet a lot of people. So I highly recommend that. If you're feeling a little bit more adventurous, I love Japan. I love Japan so much. Everyone knows that I love Japan. And while I do think it's maybe a little bit more of an intimidating place because of like the language barrier, it's also not, because the people there are so kind. It is so safe. Everything is super organized. Like you might feel like it'll be overwhelming, but it's actually one of the easier places I've traveled to. So if you're in for more of an adventure, I would highly recommend going there. And also right now is a good time to go there because the yen to dollar is at a good rate or whatever. So I like those two places, and Colombia on your group trip.
I love that recommendation. Obviously,
Yeah,
I knew you were going to say Japan, but yeah, I would agree. Spain is definitely a good one. Honestly, anywhere in Europe is like pretty
yeah,
easy to get to, and like the trains and stuff are so easy and cheap, so you can get around so easily once you get
exactly.
over there. So yeah, I like those recommendations for sure. But this was such a good episode. I feel like
So
we
fun.
jam-packed so much information into, it was only around 40 minutes. So hopefully you guys really like this as well. If you have any questions for Raimee or anything else on like the travel on a budget topic or anything like that, leave them in Spotify. We'll also link all of Raimee's social media channels in the show notes of this episode so that you guys can all go find and follow her, because her content is literally so good and it always makes me want to take a trip. So
Thank
Raimee, thank you
you.
for coming on to the Life You Love podcast. We loved having you, and until next week.
Thanks.